You know what? I just tried to come in and do a little thing about talking about the Hawks. Had Glenn on the other day, and you know what? Thought I'd just leave it at that. But hey, we have new news in the news, and I could not stay off. I had to come back. The addiction is real. Glenn, I'm bringing you back with me because I swear you're like either the good or the bad luck charm that's going along with this. But everybody, welcome Glenn back for day two of Just Hawks Talk for CawCast. How's it going?
I'm good. There's so much going on. I it's funny because when we potted earlier in the week, we talked about possibly getting on Sunday. I was like, oh, what material could we possibly have between now and Sunday? And we could go for 3 or 4 hours probably. But yeah, it's good to talk to you again, Josh.
Man, I can't believe that everything just kind of like happened in those 3 days. And you know what? Another reason I had to bring you on, somebody made this bold prediction of, no, not even prediction, said, I wouldn't be surprised if the Hawks went after David Griffin from the Cleveland Cavaliers as GM. But you know what? The tinfoil hats and everything. I'm just throwing crazy stuff out there.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like tinfoil material anymore. It seems very possibly real.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, guys, we have a really good show today. A lot of stuff. Whole lot of stuff we're going to talk about. So this can take up a good amount of chunk, excuse me, good amount of time at work as you make it through the day listening to us. I don't know how you do it. But a few things we wanted to go over. I wanted to go over Glenn. He wrote a couple of great articles on some of the Hawks wings this year, kind of review. He wrote about Cephalosha, Don Levy, and Torin Prince. Also, we have questions that I got in email. Listeners, you guys are the greatest. Some of the picked questions getting for Twitter. But we are going to start off with the GM search. Now, over the weekend, we got a tweet from Woj, the magic 8 ball, as you would call him. He let it be known that the Hawks are interested in bringing in David Griffin from the Cavs and, drumroll, Joe Dumars, formerly of the Pistons. Am I missing anything, Glenn, before I go into this?
No, there's a Mark Stein put that out there as well. No, those are the only two names I've seen. Although since we're not back at the beginning of the weekend, I wonder if we'll start. I would expect we'll start hearing some more rumors and speculation as soon as everyone gets back to work on Monday.
Yeah. So what you mentioned about Mark Stein, and he literally says, Dumars, of course, played alongside the Hawks minority owner Grant Hill in Detroit. Griffin was a Suns executive when Hill arrived in Phoenix. You mentioned that Hill played with Dumars for his first 6 seasons with the Pistons, and Griffin was also part of the Phoenix front office when Hill signed there as a free agent years ago. Wow. Wow. What?
This might be an example of when it's not great to have a former player that's never handled any front office responsibilities be a minority owner. So yeah, this is where you might want to tell Grant, hey, this isn't your specialty here. Why don't we'll take a little input. We're not going to put a ton of weight on what you're saying because yeah, this was when a very famous former player being a minority owner might not be the most constructive thing at points like this, maybe.
um wow. Okay, so obviously some of you guys probably aren't as shocked as I am at all this coming out. I made my comments last week about Griffin and just my thoughts of him as being a GM. Basically, to sum it up, I was not really wowed with anything that he has done. Now, granted, he did have LeBron on his team and he didn't get fired then. So I guess that should be an accomplishment on its own. But wow. But Joe Dumars. Oh boy.
blast
Oh,
a blast from the past.
okay. Joe Dumars. Now, this news, of course, came out least I found out on the same day that I just on of Cinco de Mayo. So I might have taken the lady out, and we might have had a few too many sangrias, margaritas, and Coronas. And I started talking and thinking about this, but oh boy, Glenn, Joe Dumars scares me. I'm very worried.
You've made that more than obvious. I was talking to my wife this morning about. She's like, "What are you doing?" I guess I'm doing a little bit of research for the podcast, and I said, I said, Josh has been swatting away Joe Dumars speculation like the Kimbe Mutombo does in that commercial he had.
Oh my goodness. All those commercials. Not today.
Yeah, it's like Josh has been smacking that speculation back like the Kimbe.
It's more as I may have been. You know what? I've probably been overreacting, and I have had my mind changed on a lot of things with research given to me. And I don't know, Joe Dumars. Okay, Joe Dumars had a very promising start as the Pistons GM. He was the GM for what, 14 seasons, 16
Yep,
seasons?
14.
14 seasons? 14 seasons. Okay. Had a very promising start. He did put together that team that got the Pistons to the finals in 2004 and won the finals in 2004.
Yep.
6 straight visits to the Eastern Conference Championship, and he had another finals visit in 2005 in which they lost to the San Antonio Spurs, if memory serves me correctly.
Yeah,
No.
I could do the quick rundown if you want. So
Yeah, go ahead.
he got the job in 2000, so before the 2001 2002 season, I believe. It may have been the prior one. He won Executive of the Year for the 2002 2003 season. They won the championship, as you mentioned, in 2004. In 2005 and 2006, they had the best record they've had in franchise history. And all the accolades stop in 2006, despite the fact that he remained in the position all the way through 2014. Okay. So yeah, so he had a blazing start and a not impressive second half to his tenure there is the way I would describe it.
I don't even know if it's not impressive. It's like it's like when you light something on fire and then dance in the ashes and then continue dancing for another day. Like I don't know, like his second half was so bad. Like I want to say I pulled up an article I think on ESPN. Let me see if I have it right now. But they're talking about worst GMs, and I believe this is 2010. They have Joe Dumars at 30, and ironically, David Griffin at 29. But oh boy, oh man.
Let's hope things have changed since then. If this is our poll we're working with,
I'm kind of hoping that. Okay, you know what? David Griffin has had. Let me get the accolades for real quick that I know of off the top of my head for David Griffin before I go in and talk about Joe Dumars. David Griffin has he's been GM for 3 years, 4 years, I believe. All for the Cavs. Really, I mean, he's helped the team together, and he did get a championship 2 years ago. If you want to go off of those credentials, conference finals, 3, 4? I don't know how many straight years.
This is LeBron's third year. This is LeBron's third year back, so that they seem very much on their way to a third straight finals. I would say, the most interesting decision he made was to hire David Blatt, who had no coaching experience in the NBA or professionally outside of Israel. He may have had some other experience in Europe, I'm forgetting, but that was interesting. But I have to kind of filter that a little bit because of the fact that he hired Blatt before he had any idea that LeBron was coming back. So that move was really made to try to build up with a young core and that obviously ended up not being at all what happened. But I think the most impressive move I've seen him make was to have the audacity to fire Blatt when they had the best record in the conference, but he knew that things were not on the right track. They weren't. He realized they were going to become their best version of themselves with Blatt at the helm and with the Ty Lue. So I do give him a lot of credit for being bold and making the move that he made then, which resulted in a championship last year. We'll see how far they go this year.
The David Blatt, you're right. The David Blatt hire was good to me because at the time, I believe David Blatt, I wrote an article way, way back in the past, back when I was known as the username Throwed, haha, on Peachtree Hoops. I wrote an article where I kind of supported David Blatt saying, hey, I'd be cool if the Hawks brought him in. Of course, this is back when Larry Drew was the coach for Atlanta. So I did like the David Blatt hire, especially for if it was supposed to be for the young players. I believe at the time, Wiggins, Waiters, Kyrie, Tristan. Yeah, so for that, I did support the move. But, everything changed when LeBron wrote that letter and decided to leave Miami.
Indeed.
So, all right, let's get to the juicy stuff right now. Joe Dumars. So I kind of made it known that I did not like the decision for Joe Dumars. I still do not like it if that were to happen. But, maybe he could change, kind of like, Stan Van Gundy took that year off from coaching. He hasn't really done anything amazing with the Pistons, but, he took that year off from coaching and I don't know. You know what? Never mind. I kind of talked myself out of this. So, but one thing that I am repetitively kind of seeing of Joe Dumars is, hey, he brought him a championship. Glenn, what in the world? Okay, is it wrong for me? You know what? I'm going to say it. Is it wrong for me to think that getting a championship might kind of I guess you'd say hype or make your credentials too strong? Just, you know what? This whole Dumars thing is just blowing my mind.
Yeah, so
that I can't think straight.
I agree, because what you see is that he inherited a team that had some good players on it and did a good job of kind of building for a couple of years. But when I went back and looked through and did my research, I noticed that he fired Rick Carlisle after 2 seasons.
Oh, wait, hold on. Okay, never mind. I was going to get into something later, but yeah, go ahead with that.
Okay, if I'm about to ruin a future segment or upcoming segment, let me know and I'll back off.
Okay.
So he fired Rick Carlisle, who many people now consider to be right behind Pop as the second best coach in the league. A lot of people have that opinion.
Yes.
He hired Larry Brown, and Larry Brown has an interesting history that I won't get into right now.
All right. Oh, wait, hold on. So let me stop you right there at the Larry Brown, and you can jump in on my conversation, jump in on whatever I do in this upcoming segment, wherever you want to throw out these little things. But real quick, I just wanted to say, to me, it kind of seems that you getting a championship may kind of like overhype or overdo or make your credentials too strong, in a sense that we're kind of seeing that with the Knicks right now. Everyone loved Phil Jackson when he was coming into New York, but right now it's a little bit different. So I wonder if the same thing is kind of with Joe Dumars, in a sense. Hey, he won a championship, but are we going to ignore everything bad that happened? Anyway, that was my quick point. I was trying to get out.
I agree. I have a little more, but I'll fit that into what you have prepared.
All right. So, guys, we are going to do a top 10 countdown for Joe Dumars. And this inspired me this morning right before I wrote the pod. Took me about an hour or so to put this together. But, guys, I'm going to go over a top 10 countdown of of GM decision blunders in the tenure that Joe Dumars was GM. So, number 10, let's get started. And some of these were kind of shocking to me. So, number 10, of course, the weakest 2009, Boston offered Rajon Rondo, Ray Allen for Stuckey, Rip Hamilton, and Tayshaun Prince. He denied that. Um, this is 2009. Again, it should be mentioned that this was before kind of Rondo was known as the Rondo for like the next kind of like 4 or 5 years in Boston. But come on, you have to get rid of Prince, Stuckey, Rip, especially for kind of like how they're performing towards the end.
Yeah,
towards the end of their career.
Yeah, exactly. And no one's going to be impressed by a GM who realizes a good player is a good player after he's become a good player. You're going to be impressed by a GM who can evaluate the talent for what the talent could become. And so at that point in time, apparently they either were just not willing to pull the trigger or did not do a very good evaluation on Rondo at that point.
Yep. So this leads me to number 9. And this is kind of where things are eye-opening to me as I researched it. So number 9, in Joe Dumars' attempt to rebuild, I believe this is around 2011, he, in his attempt to rebuild, he drafted Brandon Knight in 2011, Monroe 2010, and Andre Drummond 2012. Now, you see that he's going with, let's be young, let's start to rebuild. Cool. All right, Dumars, whatever. Makes sense. Now, little do we know that after all this, Joe Dumars went and performed a sign and trade with Brandon Jennings for a 3-year deal for Brandon Knight and just, I don't know, some random guy named Chris Middleton. So basically, he got rid of Chris Middleton and Brandon Knight for Brandon Jennings, who, hey, is he still with the Pistons? No.
Nope. I think we recall seeing him play against the Hawks last week.
Yeah. Wow. And Chris
Middleton is right now 10 times better than either of the other two players in that transaction.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just, you want to go younger. You want to rebuild. So, hey, you would have had Brandon Knight, Chris Middleton, and at least Drummond there. Because, Monroe did walk, but I don't know. That's interesting just to bring in Brandon Knight, which can be related to my number 8 on the item is, and this is probably number 1 to Hawks fans, bringing in Josh Smith in this attempt to rebuild on a 4-year contract. And we know that he was waived in 2014, which basically means he played a season and a half under this 4-year contract that he was given. And this was the staple move that got Joe Dumars removed from front office. Oh, boy.
Yeah, it makes you wonder who they were bidding against it when they agreed to that contract.
Oh, yeah. Oh, man, So I stopped you earlier because you were talking about coaches, and that goes to my number 7 on the list. Number 7, I couldn't fit a 1 through 10 on this, so I just said coaching blunders. So I did not know this, but did you know Larry Brown chose to terminate his contract early?
I did, and that
I didn't know this at first.
That's a trend with Larry Brown. He wears out his welcome very quickly anywhere he goes. And so let me give you a 60 seconds of my research on Larry Brown.
Go ahead.
So Larry Brown coached for 9 different teams in the league. And anytime, once he left, the term that I've used in some of the comments and some of the other things I've been writing is that whenever Larry Brown leaves a team, having been previously its head coach, he leaves scorched earth. And so I actually, I haven't seen the rest of your list yet, so I'm still reacting to it. But based on my research, it might seem strange because they won a championship, but hiring Larry Brown might be the worst decision he made. In that, what I've seen over and over is Larry Brown goes in as a head coach and just becomes an absolute dominant force within that organization. and is so convinced that he's the smartest person in every conversation, and it ends up kind of just destroying the confidence of all the people around him in the organization. And so 9 teams, and so I did research on how did those 9 teams do the 4 years after Larry Brown was their coach. So there's 36 seasons, and of those 36 seasons, there's only 12 winning seasons, and the average number of wins across those 4 seasons for teams after Larry Brown left, the average win was 36 wins. So,
ooh, boy.
yes, and that includes, well, when he left the Spurs, they won 55, 59, and 62 games in the first 3 years after he left the Spurs. So that's the real big anomaly. But that Spurs team had Bob Hill as their head coach, and Bob Hill, in my opinion, is one of the most underappreciated coaches in NBA history. I think he was an excellent coach, did really well in Orlando as well. So that 36 win average even includes that anomaly with the Spurs. But yes, and his last stop was in Charlotte. The 4 seasons after he left Charlotte, 30 wins, 21 wins, 7 wins, and 23 wins. That's the last organization he left. So yeah, Larry Brown might be one of the most intelligent X's and O's coaches ever, but his style is nothing but bad for an organization, and there is ruin in his wake at almost every stop.
Huh. Well then, this is totally going to kill. This is either going to support what you say or totally kill my list.
Okay.
What I'm about to say.
Well, sometimes we agree too much, so it'll be fine if we were.
All right, so I'm just going to straight up say I don't agree with you. Now, granted, you have all the facts and all the evidence and all the information to prove that you're telling the truth and everything's correct. But you know what? So I think, despite saying that, I wonder if letting Larry Brown go was a mistake, because let's go through the coaching blunders that we have had under Joe Dumars' kind of hiring. Hired Larry Brown, went to the finals, won the finals in 2014. He led the team to the finals in 2015, and he terminated his contract right after that, to which he hired Flip Saunders. Now, he did get, Billups and a couple guys on the All-Star team, but he was eventually fired in 2008 after losing the Eastern Conference Finals 3 years in a row. Now, something that kind of popped up to me was when I went back, kind of researched all these articles on why Flip Saunders was fired, because I thought to myself, hey, 3 Eastern Conference trips in a row? That's kind of good, but I'm kind of, what? So, how do I put this? Some of the comments made by Joe Dumars kind of made it seem like he had to make a scapegoat for all of this, because he just kind of said, we're about winning here, and that's not going to cut it. And we believe that we can do better, blah, blah, blah. So Flip Saunders may have been scapegoated for this. I don't know. But hey, so 3 years after that, he got fired. Next up on the list after him was Michael Curry. Michael Curry ended up only winning 39 games and was fired after his first year. Interesting enough, he signed a 3-year contract, but fired after his first year. And next up, John Kusler. I'm probably completely butchering this name. If you know how to pronounce it, Glenn, please correct me.
If I could, I would. I don't remember.
Kugler.
I don't remember much, but I don't remember that guy at all, to be honest.
Kugler. Okay, well, he coached the Pistons for 2 years and only won 55 games in those 2 years, 93 losses. Fired after 2 seasons. Hired Lawrence Frank. He was fired after 2 seasons. And then hired Maurice Cheeks. Fired not even through 1 full season, if you remember. That was the year with Josh Smith on the team. Josh Smith and Brandon Jennings, that was that year. He was fired before the season ended. ended with a record of 21-29 before John Lawyer, the interim head coach, replaced him and went 8-24. That is the coaching success that he's basically had. So what I'm saying is maybe it was a mistake letting Larry Brown go, but now that you mentioned the history, I don't know. But definitely didn't help the team with the coaching after that.
Yeah, so I'm not going to really disagree with you on the negative impact of Larry Brown leaving. It definitely sent them into a period of instability in their coaching ranks for sure. But what I would say is that when he agreed to allow Larry Brown to be the coach, he should have been prepared for this is probably only going to last 3 or 4 years, and then it may not be good when he leaves, because that is the trend with Larry Brown. The other thing that I would share here is that this may sound a little bit like tinfoil corner, but it's actually not.
Oh, I love tinfoil corner.
Yes, I know. So Larry Brown is a Carolina guy. He's a North Carolina guy, so he kind of grew up under Dean Smith and that whole fraternity. And if you know anything about the Carolina group, is that they do not cross each other. So, for example, when George Karl is a Carolina guy. When he was in Sacramento, he would reportedly not want to play Seth Curry because Seth Curry played at Duke. He would reportedly give DeMarcus Cousins eternal crap because DeMarcus Cousins played at Kentucky. And so in the league, this is a real thing. So once an organization crosses Larry Brown, so you make Larry Brown feel like he has to leave or he can't continue with you or what have you, when you go to try to find that new coach, anyone who is connected to that Carolina group is not going to play ball because they're not going to do anything to make Larry Brown look bad. And so one of the impacts of bringing on one of those Carolina guys is that if it doesn't go well, you are really cutting down the pool of potential replacement coaches that you have because anyone associated with Carolina is not going to play ball. So that's what I would share.
Yep. Man, it's just the coaching. You mentioned Rick Carlisle. And you mentioned this a while ago, so sorry if this sounds a little off.
Right.
But I completely forgot Rick Carlisle won Coach of the Year while he was GM, and then you said he fired him right after that. So Rick Carlisle, Larry Brown, then Flip Saunders, then the whole list: Michael Curry, John Coaster, Lawrence Frank, Maurice Cheeks, John Lawyer, and then that was the last thing. That basically got him canned.
Not good.
Yeah, not good at all. Kind of, man, Carlisle. He got rid of Rick Carlisle.
He's a damn good coach.
Yeah. So let me see. This brings me to my number 6 on my list. And as I flip the page to try to find it, re-signing Rip Hamilton to a 3-year deal. Now, at one point in time, people thought, Rip Hamilton was really good. But keep in mind, this is post Chauncey Billups. And he would have been 35 by the end of the deal. He was getting paid $12 million a year, which back then was a lot, because this is $2 million more per year he made than Ray Allen at the time. And this is when Ray Allen, I believe, was in Boston at this time. So re-signing Rip Hamilton for 3 years was a pretty bad idea, which is something we might be facing soon. Because although Rip is a scorer, he wasn't exactly known for helping with rebounding and defending.
Yes, especially when he was. It seems he should have been thinking about going younger at that point in time. So investing in that contract didn't make sense to me for where that franchise was at all.
All right, and so numbers 2 through 5, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I just had to do. they all connect with each other, if that makes sense,
Okay.
because it's a list of it's they all connect for the reasons of why someone was brought in or traded or something. So number 5, I said this team, the Pistons, need to open up cap space, and the brilliance of Joe Dumars again. In order to open up cap space, he traded away some random guy for a second round pick known as Aaron Aflalo for a second round pick, and traded away Amir Johnson to the Bucks for, I don't even know how to say his name, Fabio Oberto. Um, wish the Hawks back then could have traded Aaron Aflalo for a second round pick. That would have been nice.
Yes.
That would have been nice. And so I say that because this connects to numbers 3 and 4. So number 4, they needed to sign to free up cap space. This must surely be some amazing basketball player that they had to trade away Aaron Aflalo and Amir Johnson for in order to free cap space up. Yeah, it was so they could bring in Charlie Villanueva for a 5-year deal. That's just one of the big free agent signings. And at number 3, on top of that, was so they could also sign to give Ben Gordon a 5-year, $55 million year deal. Now, Ben Gordon's good, but that's a heck of a lot of money. You gave up all these assets and everything just to free up cap space so you can rebuild with Ben Gordon and Charlie Villanueva. And the thing that really does not make sense about Ben Gordon, and if we go back to number 6 on my list, was because that was the same year they just signed, well, I don't know if it's the same year, but they just signed Rip Hamilton to that 3-year deal that he's making more than, as we previously discussed, Ray Allen, which makes no sense whatsoever. That you're having these two guys coming in, you're paying them all this money only to bring one of them off the bench when they just should have been dealt. And they're both essentially the same player, both play the same position, both score first guards that do very little on the defensive end and very little with rebounding. And all of that just amazed me. When I saw that, I was like, wait, why did you bring in Ben Gordon on a 5-year deal when you have Rip Hamilton? And I'm not even getting to the Charlie Villanueva part. Help me, Glenn. I'm going crazy.
Yeah, so my reaction to that is that they had gotten so far away from their defensive identity at that point. I mean, if you go all the way back to the Isaiah Thomas, Joe Dumars, that the bad boys, as they were known, that they won on absolutely their defensive identity. And then the team that Dumars put together when he brought in Rashid to kind of complete that team, again, they won on their defensive identity. And so all of these transactions that you see later were just taking the team further and further away from that defensive identity in my view. And I will say I always enjoyed Charlie Villanueva as a player, but not as a core part of my roster. I just kind of enjoyed watching him play. And I will forever remember him for being the guy that tried to break up the dance party that Russell Westbrook and campaign were having before a playoff game. I think that was last season, but it says everything that you need to know about Charlie Villanueva. That's the most that's the memory of him that is foremost in my brain for some reason. So
I also remember him getting into it with Kevin Garnett multiple times.
He's not afraid to mix it up. He was not.
Yeah. Yes. There. Okay. There is that, but it's also kind of like, I don't know, me saying, "Hey, I love Ivan Johnson" when he was with the Hawks.
Right.
But there's no way I want him to be a main.
Yeah, like I said, I like watching Charlie Villanueva, but he can't be your third or fourth best player in your roster. That can't be the case.
Yeah, and that's kind of what happened.
And he was paid. He was paid like he was. So
yeah, 5-year contract. But the Ben Gordon one, great offensive player. He had those random battles offensively, but right after signing Rip Hamilton, like, did they expect Rip to retire or something? Like, I don't know. I don't know, because he played with the Bulls afterwards. And Prince was still in the roster at this time too. I don't know what he
Prince
was.
was in the league not this past season, but the previous season. That's crazy to me.
Yeah. So 3 through 6 kind of run together. That's why I had to say that. The whole Ben Gordon thing at number 3
That
just
makes
made
sense.
it made no sense to me. So
Yeah,
number two, um, and I remember when this happened, I thought it was a terrible trade. Um, Trading away Chauncey Billups for Allen Iverson. We knew that the team needed to be kind of, I guess you'd say blown up because this is after Big Ben, not the Ben Gordon I was talking about. There's another player on the Pistons that was named Big Ben, named excuse me, Ben Gordon. He was the center, as you mentioned, heavily when they were very so much into playing defense at that time,
good.
Glenn. Um, Ben Gordon left, and they didn't know what to do with the roster now. Now, one would think maybe you should trade away your defensive liability shooting guard away. One would think maybe you could get something for Prince for another team. But one should probably think that you should keep the leader of the team. The guy who, when I used to watch the Pistons, he essentially made some of those players better. Like I always thought Chauncey Billups made Rip Hamilton better when he was out there because that's how Rip got a lot of his scoring.
Chauncey made his
Yeah,
teammates better everywhere he went.
yeah,
You may recall that Carmelo wasn't really doing much in Denver until he had Chauncey Billups playing with him, and Chauncey basically taught Carmelo how to find his spots on the floor, how to get the ball with the right amount of time left on the shot clock, all those sorts of things. So I know that Carmelo hasn't become the championship caliber player that a lot of people maybe thought he would become, but he's a
yeah.
really accomplished offensive player. And Chauncey Billups being traded
Help
there
him.
has a lot to do with the offensive player Carmelo became. But I would also say, so I went back and listened to the Woj podcast with Joe Dumars that he did a number of months ago to kind of prep for this. And they were talking about the trade of Chauncey Billups for Allen Iverson. And so what I recall back when the trade happened was that it was branded as we're gonna retool to make another run. And so AI is going to come in and be our guy and help us make another run. But when you hear Joe Dumars talk about it now, he says, "Oh, we owe 3 or 4 more years on Chauncey Billups' contract, and we need to move his contract." So I think Joe Dumars is playing a lot of revisionist history in the way that
Yeah.
he talks about that trade now.
Oh, I remember.
That was
I
not a
remember.
move salary trade. That was a we want to make another run trade.
Yeah, I remember back then because that's how they advertised it as when I remember watching the team, and also because this is definitely the tail end of Iverson's career before, he was still a very popular name, but it was at this point you kind of realized, oh, at least I realized, I think Billups is better than Iverson right
Yeah,
now.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I have to say I won't go on too long about Chauncey, but my opinion is that Chauncey Billups might be the most underrated player in NBA history. He's his
Really?
Yeah, his value does not show up statistically, but if you look at what he helps his team accomplish, it was noteworthy. And the other thing I would just say is that when I went back and looked at this trade to kind of look at the details of the Chauncey for AI trade, it would surprise me that Iverson was 33 and Billups was 32. I would have sworn that Billups was maybe 30, at the time. But because my recollection is that when I saw that trade, I thought, man, Iverson has so many miles on his tread, especially for a little guy, that there's no way he can get back to the level he was at when Philadelphia went to the finals against the Lakers, for example. That version of AI had long since passed.
Yep.
And yeah, Chauncey Billups was the heart and soul of that team, and so trading the heart and soul of your team, in my opinion, is never going to, or very very seldomly make you better.
Yeah, and kind of like what you mentioned, if Joe Dumars really did say that in an interview, that is definitely revisionist history
100%.
because because when you think about it, even then, Billups should not have left. And it's just amazing that he was such a much better player. And if you were blowing the team up, easily Tayshaun Prince, and Rick Hamilton, they were easily replaceable. To me, you could have found a replacement for either one of those guys over replacing Chauncey Billups if you claimed you wanted to make another run. But
Absolutely. Yep.
uh, jeez, like, and this also factors into the fact that you gave Ben Gordon money. So you gave Ben Gordon money, but yet you couldn't keep. Okay.
Yeah, and you see it.
Yeah.
You see Dumar's thinking continue even after those moves because
Yeah.
he brought in Brandon Jennings, a no defense,
Yeah.
a hot and cold scorer, and so he kept going back at that bite, and
Yeah.
never reestablished the defensive foundation that had always served that franchise so well.
And the thing that kind of upsets me the more is him talking about, at least an interview, because I did read little snippets of it, mentioning pace and space and everything, and then you go back and realize, really, you're preaching that? Then why did you sign Josh Smith to play with Greg Monroe and Andre Drummond? But that's okay. And
Yeah, and on that note, that was the section of the interview where Woj was saying basically, what have you learned since you left the Pistons organization? What have you been doing and what have you learned? And the only thing that he mentioned was pace and space. He didn't mention analytics. He didn't mention, sports science. He didn't mention, all he said was pace and space. So if that's all that you've gleaned from your time away from having a job in the league and kind of bouncing around and kind of checking in with other executives and what they're doing, if all you took away from that was pace and space, then I'm afraid you didn't collect as much intelligence and ideation as I think one should have.
well, another thing also on top of that is scouting. Um, in a sense, he could have helped with scouting, which before I go to my number one, so everybody, thank you, Chauncey Billups, number two. Before I go to my number one, I'm going to have some honorable mentions in the top 10. So here's some honorable mentions. As I mentioned, I was going to put some of the coaches here, but then I said, you know what, it'd be much more fun to put all the coaching blunders under an entire number instead of just like the mistakes he made. Even though the Rick Carlisle one alone deserves, uh, I don't know. Uh, ah. But here we have 2000 draft. Not a great draft, but still drafted some guy named Martin Clevis. Could have had Turgaloo, Quentin Richardson, Michael Redd. Um, 2001, he drafted not Roddy White of the Falcons, but Rodney White. You ever heard of him?
It barely rings a bell.
Okay, so Rodney White averaged 9 points a game for his 4 years in the NBA and only played 1 year in Detroit. He was a lottery pick in 2001, taken one spot ahead of, and they could have had him, but taken one spot ahead of Joe Johnson.
Wow.
Also, he was picked ahead of Zach Randolph, Gerald Wallace, Tony Parker, Gilbert Arenas, Samuel Dellenbert, and Brandon Hayward, just to name a couple.
That's not good. That is not good.
Yeah. Yeah. Boy. 2009, the Austin Day signing. That's more recent. Point guards galore. You could have just picked up a point guard and traded one away, but boy. Took Austin Day at 15, had a Drew Holiday, Ty Lawson, Jeff Teague, Taj Gibson, Damari Carroll, Patrick Beverly, Patty Mills. Yeah. One thing he also did mention in an article that I read was since the 2000 and I believe, 3 NBA draft, he says he did more dedication into research on draft picks and these honorable mentions that I don't know. It just kind of goes back to me saying, do you get a little bit more leeway if you get a championship? Because some of the mistakes he's making would have gotten anybody else fired in their first season.
Yeah, well, and it's not just the championship; it's the fact that he's one of the greatest Pistons players ever.
That
And
too.
when an organization goes into a relationship like that, that person has so much equity with the fan base and the supporters that it is really hard to move them out. And so I think that was a big part of why he stayed as long as he did. That championship happened so early in the tenure. Any success he had was so early in his tenure. I think the main reason he stayed all the way through 2014 was just because of how much the Detroit Pistons fan base loves Joe Dumars. And so that is a very tricky road to try to walk when you go into business with one of the franchise's greatest players ever. It would be like if Dominique were the GM of the Hawks, for example. He would be terrible at that job, obviously. But once he had it, trying to get him out of that position because of all the equity he has with the fan base would be very difficult.
Oh boy, and I love him, but judging by some of the comments or, excuse me, his broadcasting. So
side to side.
The bingo board gets me every single time when Sheldon shows me that bingo board of his sayings. But
you don't even need to have it out to play. That's how good it is. You can just do it in your mind, and you got it.
it's so funny. But you mentioned this about former players. Maybe you should take a note from James Dolan, because you see what happens to Charles Oakley.
Indeed, yes.
Oh boy, but the Knicks, they are a conundrum on their own. That's just a whole other story. But
yes, James Dolan, the one guy who makes 29 other fan bases feel good about themselves. At least we're not the Knicks.
Yeah. Okay. So you could probably can you guess what my number one is? My number one on Joe Dumars screw ups in his time as a GM.
I can't, and I think the reason I can't was because I was so sure that the Iverson trade would be number one, and so that's I think that's kind of pushing any other possibilities out of my head because I thought for sure that would be number one. So surprise me.
So it was up there. Like, this was very close, and I put that at 2 because he at least had the whole thing of having him. Excuse me, I have my guest returning.
No problem.
Got the coffee and everything. Anyway, so, but this is at number 1 because just think of how this could have changed the franchise for the better had they done this. So the Pistons drafted at number 2 in what is known as probably one of the most loaded drafts in the NBA history, the 2003 NBA draft. Darko Milicic. I don't even know how to pronounce his name.
Darko. Oh, I totally forgot about Darko. Here you go. Yeah.
Okay.
He actually addressed that on his Woj podcast as well. So.
Okay. And do you know? Can you name just like 3 or 4 of the players that he passed on, just off the top of your head, for Darko?
Oh my gosh, I have a hard time pinning down specific years, but I do remember that was a very loaded draft. And Darko's probably considered the biggest draft bust in NBA history. Probably
one of the biggest up there.
Yeah,
he was taken after LeBron James, but ahead of Carmelo Anthony, Chris Bosh, Dwayne Wade, and that's just the big ones. We can even go down like the smaller guys. Like, would you rather have David West over Darko?
I love David West.
Would you rather have Kyle Korver over Darko?
Yes, he was lighting it up in the first half.
Would you rather have, in their prime when they were playing prime? Would you rather have T.J. Ford, Kirk Heinrich, heck, even Josh Howard?
Yeah. So I think you were right to put that first. And
Yeah.
I'm a little ashamed of myself that I didn't recall that one. But like I said, I was so fixated on the Iverson trade that I didn't even have the mental space to have that on my radar.
Yeah, so I don't even have to begin to say this. Like, this is up there. Like, this is up there with Marvin Williams over Chris Paul kind of difference that could have made to a franchise.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
that one hurts.
yeah,
Yeah. So on the Woj podcast, Joe Dumars made something along the lines of a comment of, yeah, after we drafted Darko, we started becoming more serious about doing things like background checks.
yes, because he said they do 20% of the checks back then that they do now, or something like that. To
Correct.
which made me kind of go like, really? Then what about the other draft picks you totally missed on?
Right.
But you know what? I'm gonna leave that alone. But yes, I did hear that part. Oh man.
Good list. I think you did a solid job. I'll give you a solid. I'll give you an AI for that.
Okay, so for everyone who I don't know got annoyed with listening to me, but let me go through my 1 through 10. Darko #1, the Billups trade #2, signing Ben Gordon 3, then the whole signing Charlie Villanueva 4, opening up cap space, which trading away Aaron Aflalo. Jeez. Just small stuff like that. Resigning Rip Hamilton 6, all the coaching blunders. We went through the list. Um, Larry Sanders, Michael Curry, so on and so on, to Maurice Cheeks, they got him fired. Bringing in Josh Smith. As a Hawks fan, we have to mention that somewhere in the list. Sorry,
We
guys.
do.
Um, the attempted rebuild by bringing in Brandon Jennings on a 3-year deal, by getting rid of Brandon Knight and Chris Middleton, and then the whole #10, which I kind of give, I don't know, but turned down the trade for Rondo and Ray Allen for Rodney Stuckey, Rip Hamilton, and Tayshaun Prince. There we go. That's my top 10 coaching blunders in Joe Dumars' history. And that list explains, or hopefully should explain, why I'm just so against it. So against Joe Dumars right now. And listening to your explanation from his interview, it kind of leaves me questioning. It's like you're kind of contradicting yourself, or you're having revisionist history, especially with the whole Billups thing.
Yeah, and what I will probably want to share with your listeners is, because I think we're seeing quite a bit of the Peachtree Hoops community start to energize around the possibility of Joe Dumars being the GM. I'm firmly against it as well. But so what I will say, hopefully this might help those folks a little bit, is when I listened to Joe Dumars talk with Woj, I enjoyed the conversation very much. He came off as a very likable guy. From where he started in life in Louisiana, and being pretty separated from other parts of the country, or even the world, a really impressive person, enjoyable guy to listen to talk. So I came away like, wow, that was a really pleasant experience hearing Joe Dumars talk with Woj. So, but if, for example, when I look at him, I think of him as someone, the league should hire him and put him into some sort of kind of mentorship position, not around decision making, but in terms of he carries himself very well. He represents an organization very well. So I would not put him anywhere near decision-making authority for any team that I was rooting for. But I think in terms of the person he developed himself to be, I think he could mentor folks that are trying to build themselves a background and a resume to pursue front office positions and things like that. I think he has some value in the league, but I think he would be one of the worst hires the Hawks could possibly make for their GM position.
Yes, definitely. And everybody that kind of questioned me, like, why are you so against him? He brought the team a championship. And I'm just like, that's what a championship does not equal out the leeway. Like, Rick Carlisle alone, a guy who won Coach of the Year, and then you get rid of him like either the next year or that same year. That's just kind of like, I don't know. Just I'm just against it. Although, so Glenn, something I do have to question about with the interview that you spoke of. You did mention how, I guess, how great, inconsiderate, smart, or whatever he sounds with the interview with Woj. So something I do remember couple years ago, or a year ago, Zach Lowe did an interview with Vinny Del Negro, and at least on there, he sounded incredibly intelligent. Sounded like he knew his stuff. And you think, oh, you listen to this guy, Vinny Del Negro, he might, and his want to be a new coach, you would think, oh, hey, someone should give him a shot. But we all know you're not hiring Vinny Del Negro to be your coach.
Not if you want to be good.
No,
No, I agree with you. I agree with you. And when you have to be smart enough, I think, to know that when you listen to something like that, and even when you're in the middle of enjoying it, that Joe Dumars knew that this was one of the primary avenues for him to go back to being relevant for a potential front office position. So you have to imagine there was a ton of prep that went into getting ready for that interview.
Yep.
But it wasn't just him, it was just his team prepping him for that interview to make sure he came off as well as he did. And the same with Vinny Del Negro. Vinny Del Negro didn't casually sit down to talk with Woj. He wants to be a coach again. And so he very much prepped to come off as well as he could. And that has to be part of how you filter what you're experiencing when you listen to something like that.
Yeah. I basically kind of made the comparison saying, when I go apply for a job interview, I read the company's website, I read everything. And I basically said, who doesn't? And I'm saying, who doesn't sound smart for an interview, no matter what it is, if you don't do your research? Like, I could go apply for a company that has to do with, I don't know, chemical engineering for medicine. I know nothing about any of that. But if I have an interview, I'm going to go research it. So, not to that extent, but him knowing that this was his alley, this was his way to get his voice out there, he's going to be ready for this. So, take what you want from it, but he's been prepping for this.
Yeah, so like I said, I enjoyed that podcast episode,
Yeah.
but I don't want him anywhere near my team.
Yeah.
In terms of decision making, there are other things I think. Like I
Yeah.
said, he has other value, but I don't want him anywhere near the decision making role in my team.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like, not towards decision making, but I don't know if he was brought on as helping to coach or player develop. I don't know. If we brought him in to teach DeAndre Bembry all of his ways, I'd be totally cool with it.
Yeah. How do you play off the ball? How do you defend
Yeah.
primary lead scorers? I mean, he certainly has a ton of experience that he could draw from in helping folks in certain roles. But I don't want him in a decision making function at all.
I was going to say number one on my list should have been that photo of him with the two phones up to his ears, but that just is widely used as a meme. But anyway, oh, sorry.
That was the last thing I was to say before we move on is on Woj's podcast, Dumars explained the Rashid trade as being the first trade in NBA history that was handled via BlackBerry. And that's when I said, okay, you're really dating yourself now. You're not making yourself sound like the most modern executive by citing that trade you made that was the first ever via BlackBerry. So that was interesting. So, okay, I'm done talking about Joe Dumars if you want to move on.
Okay. All right, guys. So we've been doing a ton of Joe Dumars talk, and I just gave my reasons why I am incredibly against it. If you guys don't agree with my list, or you guys have something that you want to add to my list, or something you want to add to tell me why I'm wrong, feel free. You could tweet me, JLaneATL, mention it in the comments, or I don't know, email me, cawcast@gmail.com. You know my contact information. I mention it at the end of every show. But anyway, that's just my list, and I felt I wanted to get that out there. And we're going to take a quick break. When we return, I'm going to go over Glenn's Glenn's play review for some of the guys on the wing, and we are going to go over questions. So thank you for sticking with us so far. We will be back. Stretch it out right now.
Yeah, I'm gonna take 30 seconds and I'll be right back.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I'm back.
Okay, cool.
Let's get some water.
All right. And we are back, guys. Man, we've been going on for a while and had to get all the emotions and everything running high off of the last part. But now we're going to turn this over to Glenn. And Glenn, in your series review of some of the players that you wrote about, you wrote a ton of information for guys that I had no idea you could get that much on. And just some random amazing facts that I had no idea. So we're going to start with the one that I'm just most impressed of. And by, I don't mean player-wise, I mean impressed with you of being able to write about this. Mike Dunleavy, you somehow spun the article around to talk about how great of a three-point shooter he was for the Hawks. I believe you wrote he was 40, like close to 43% from three. Like, what can you tell me about him? Let the people know real quick.
Yeah, so when they moved Korver, when they decided it was the right thing to do to move Korver, they weren't going to do anything like, for example, to help Dennis have some space to work with, or Dwight to have some space to work with if they couldn't find some semblance of a perimeter shooter. So I think just in terms of trying to keep that aspect of a player available on the team, I think it made sense to bring him back in terms of, creating some space for some other guys to use. What I will say, what I did mention in the article is that Dunleavy could not handle the minutes workload that Kyle was handling, even though they're roughly the same age. Dunleavy has serious back issues. So I was honestly surprised by how much he ended up playing for the Hawks. But when you look at the numbers, he made his 3-point shots and he created space. And so basically the thesis of my article was he did what was expected of him, and that we shouldn't think negatively of him or hate on him or whatever just because he's associated with Korver leaving. That wasn't his decision. He came in and he did what they asked him to do, and I think that's a fair way to look back at Dunleavy's season. But I also did dig in a little bit, and I noted that Kyle created more space because Kyle was taking 3-pointers with defenders closer to him than Dunleavy was. Dunleavy was taking many open 3-pointers. So while he made enough of his 3-pointers to satisfy expectations, you can also see in the numbers that he wasn't the threat Kyle was, and he wasn't creating as much space as Kyle was. But in terms of in the big picture, we won't really be able to evaluate that trade until we see what the Hawks do with that draft pick, what we expect to be 28, 29, 30, in 2019. And I've gone on record as saying that I don't think you can expect to get a great player at that level. I mean, like the Bulls did with Jimmy Butler, but that's a 1 in 100 example, right?
Yeah.
But I think if the Hawks can use that pick to bundle it with one of their own picks and move up in a draft, that might turn out to be the most successful outcome for that trade. So, for example, the Miami Heat have their draft pick this coming draft, and they have no more draft picks for maybe even 4 more years. That sounds like it would be against the rules, so I have to go back and check the math because you're not supposed to trade out draft picks in consecutive seasons. But there may be a swap or something in there that qualifies it. But so, like, for example, if the Hawks could take their number 19 pick this year and that 2019 Cavs pick and move up to get the Heat pick this year, that's just one example of how they might be able to maximize the value of that pick. So how we look at the trade will take a while to kind of finish up. But those are my thoughts on Mike Dunleavy. Yeah.
That's a good idea. Targeting those teams that don't have a draft pick. But yeah, it is kind of unfair to expect a ton out of Dunleavy. He handled, everything professionally that he did, especially when basically everybody wanted the rookies to play above him just to get the experience. So,
yeah. I also mentioned an article that I heard complaining all season long about Dunleavy playing in front of Bembry, but I honestly think they didn't want to play Bembry much this year because had he played, say, 20 to 22 minutes a game across the whole season, the shooter he is right now, he would have created a very bad track record in terms of his perimeter shooting. That could have resulted in a mental obstacle that he now will not have to overcome. So not playing him, I think, was good for Bembry's development this year because he's just not ready to do anything but be a horrible shooter. So hopefully this offseason they can work with him on his shot and he will be in the rotation next year. But I do think it was strategic to bring in Dunleavy, and I think it was strategic to play him ahead of Bembry, and that was good for Bembry. That's not the popular view in the Hawks community, but that's my view.
Okay. Well, let's move along to the next guy you wrote about, and you mentioned him on the last show, but Thabo Sefolosha. Now, I didn't know he shot 34% from three this year. And I was like, wow, managed to shoot over 33%. It is impressive for me, at least for him.
Yeah, I mean, you look at those numbers, and he's the ultimate 3-and-D guy. I think there's no question he's not going to be back next year. But I talked about the impact that Thabo had on Andre Robertson in Oklahoma City in the article, and that
Yes.
Robertson is now one of the best 3 or 4 wing defenders in the league. I think that's pretty much agreed. That's pretty much a consensus. And though his rookie season, he played behind Thabo Sefolosha. And so I made the correlation to this year, Taurean Prince played behind Thabo Sefolosha, and Taurean measured out very well defensively. I know we might talk about him in a moment, so not too much there. But just in terms of speaking about the value that Thabo has, you can see a track record of him playing excellent defense for a team, but then also you see a track record of younger players benefiting from playing along with him or playing behind him. And so I have a tremendous amount of appreciation for what Thabo brought to the Hawks, especially at the price tag. And he will always be just one of my favorite Hawks because not only what he did on the court, but the way he contributed to the development of younger players on the staff as well. He seems like a very generous teammate, and that's a quality that I think most people will appreciate.
Yeah, something I didn't notice was he averaged, I believe, over 2 steals a game, which was kind of eye-opening to me. Just like you mentioned, ultimate 3-and-D.
Yeah, he for people that played a certain amount of minutes, he had the top steal rate in the league. There were I think there were 6 or 7 other guys that were tied at 2.2 steals a game, but he basically led the league in steals per game.
All right. Now, let's get to the last guy that I wanted to talk about. You wrote this, and hopefully the most fun or interesting to talk about. But you wrote about Taurean Prince. What kind of shocked you from this season from him? And what do you think about him going into the future?
What shocked me was just how much improvement he made in one season. I mean, when he was borderline unplayable at the beginning of the year, there were a lot of questions about him adjusting to the professional defensive rules and defensive schemes at the
Yeah.
professional level because he played in such a weird defensive scheme in college at Baylor. And then when I watched him play at Baylor, when I watched him play in the summer league and stuff, you look at him like he might be a little bit of a shooter, but he shot the ball a lot better than I thought he would this season, and especially when you consider like the last month and a half or so, he really became. I would say the first 4 months of the season or so, anytime he was on the floor, it was clear that he was considering himself the fifth option, the fifth offensive option, and was just going to a corner and creating space and doing off ball stuff, right? But what I was most pleased with was to see how much confidence he gained across the season, because the last 20 games or so, if he got the ball and there was a slow defender in front of him, he'd attack and, with dribble penetration and go to the basket. If he caught the ball, he'd do a dribble sidestep and put up a three. So he was seeing himself more as a primary creator or primary attacker on the offensive scheme the last 20 games. And so that's what makes me most encouraged about his future. I do think that there is a possibility that he becomes an all-star level player. I don't think that's the most likely outcome, but I think it is a possible outcome. I think at a minimum, he's likely to be a plus defender on the wing with really good size. And I think he's going to be at least an average offensive player, but I think that the ceiling is much higher than that. So I'm very optimistic about Tarian's future.
Yeah, his improvement just through the year is just it was a consistent improvement, which made me kind of like, oh, so it's not like a flash in the pan or
No, he was building up,
yeah,
there was a building process. You could, when you look back across the season, he was building skills upon skills, skill upon skill upon skill. You can see that because his games became so much more complete as the
yeah,
season progressed, and he was playing with so much confidence as the season progressed. And so in the article, I encourage people to pay close attention to how the Hawks allow him to play in summer league this summer.
yes,
So because if he is sort of the first offensive option and they're playing through him offensively, I think that gives us an indication that the Hawks think he can become that type of player. Where if he's, say, a secondary option and is doing more off ball stuff in the summer league, I think that would give us an indication that they don't think he can become that offensive player. But my guess is they're going to let him eat as much as he wants to in the summer league, and I'll go ahead and predict he's going to be all first team summer league, if not summer league MVP. He's 6'8", 220. He'll be 24 years old. He played so well down the stretch that he should find the summer league to feel like he's going back and playing high school. But it'll be interesting to see what he's actually doing. Is he running the pick and roll? Is he playing with his back to the basket? I can't wait till summer league gets here so we can see not all those other guys and stuff. I'm most excited to see what they allow, how they feature him in summer
yeah,
league. I think it'll say a lot about the future that the Hawks see in him.
yeah. Okay, well, great. Those are the three things I wanted to ask you. And before we do that, well, wait, what am I talking about before we do that? See, I'm just messing my words up. No, we were going to go into questions next. We're going to go into questions next. And I'm trying to pull them up right now. And we are good to go. Ready for some questions, Glenn?
I'm ready. I have no idea what the questions are, but I'll do my best to provide insightful, if not entertaining, responses.
All right. Okay, so our first question from lifelong USC fan, Mitch Shale. All this is coming from Twitter, all my questions. He says, do the Hawks stick with the Dwight project? Huh.
You want to go first, or you want me to go first?
I'll give my quick answer. I don't know. um, I don't know what to think of this ownership. Dwight Howard was not a player that the Hawks, at least we know with Budenholzer, doesn't seem like a player that he would bring in. So if it was up to him, then I don't think they would stick with it. I can say that hey, send him to another team searching for popularity, or just the New York Knicks, because you can never count the Knicks out of anything. Um, but that's what I would say. But however, right now, with how the ownership is, and basically me having to do an entire hour's worth of a segment on Joe Dumars, I don't know. We might have to stick and watch it for another year. We might have to see more alley oops and post ups and uh, him having difficulty chasing guys around on pick and rolls.
Yeah, so my answer would be I don't think they have much of a choice, and I'm not going to nitpick with the person who generated the question about wording, but I don't think that it's a project. Dwight is who he is. He is what he is, and he's never anyone who has an expectation that he's ever really going to be anything other than he is right now. I don't know what they're basing that. I don't know what they would be basing that on. But I would also say that I do see a lot of people clamoring for the Hawks to trade him, but he is the first quote significant free agent they've gotten.
That's true,
right? And there is some downside to acquiring a very visible free agent and trading him after one season. The next time you sit down to talk to a star free agent, you might have a hard time explaining how committed you're going to be to that player if they just casually move on from Dwight in a trade. I understand on paper why that makes a lot of sense to think that that's the right thing to do. I would just encourage people to consider that there also is some downside to doing that as well in terms of how they would position themselves in the future to get meetings with significant free agents.
huh? Well then, great answer. All right, lifelong UNC fan at Mitchell. Thank you for your question. Next one, Garrison underscore MCD. Garrison asks, he says, probably already covered. We haven't done this yet, Garrison, trust me. Um, but hold on. Anybody not currently on the Hawks that we should be focusing on in free agency? Um, hmm. Garrison, I will be honest with you and say I haven't even looked at free agency to know who is on the list. The only thing I've been kind of worried about through the whole year is Paul Millsap. But so right now, I am not sure. However, give me a second, I can find it. Glenn, do you have an answer for him?
Well, my response would be that I think the most obvious gap that they have in the starting lineup is the shooting guard. I like Tim Hardaway, but I like him as a sixth or seventh man, not a starter. He could be a decent starter on a team, but he would need to be paired with a point guard that has more defensive versatility. Dennis and Tim are a terrible pairing defensively together as a starting backcourt. So whether or not they bring back Tim Hardaway, I do think that they should look for an opportunity to add a shooting guard. Given their cap situation, I think it's unlikely they'd be able to afford a guy like JJ Redick. He's probably going to be priced out of the Hawks' range.
Oh,
Yeah, Kentavious Caldwell Pope is a restricted free agency, but he's going to be almost surely a max guy. If Dwayne Wade opts out, I have no interest in him. And so I'm not prepared to give a few names, but there may be a second tier of shooting guards that stylistically would be a good fit starting for the Hawks, but a specific player is not coming to mind. But that's the position I would focus on when looking at potential fits for the Hawks in free agency.
yeah, that was a good answer. That's who I was thinking about at least a week ago. Clippers are going to have their back against the wall, especially if they're going to throw like every piece of money at Chris Paul, and who knows what they do with Blake Griffin.
Oh, I would bet all my future earnings that JJ Redick will not be back with the Clippers. I think he has had enough. I happen to know because he has a podcast. A lot of us know more about him than other players in some ways.
Yeah.
And he hasn't done it since he and his wife had their second child, which is totally understandable. But I know he loves Los Angeles. But if you watched his body language in that series against Utah, he was not happy with Chris Paul. He was not happy with Doc. He was extremely frustrated. And there's just no doubt in my mind that he is excited to look for other opportunities. I'm afraid I'd love to see him with the Hawks, but I think it's unfortunately not very probable just because of where their cap sheet sits and how much money he's likely to command. He would have to be attracted to the Hawks for some reason and probably take a discount as compared to other offers for him to end up there. And I don't know why there's any likelihood that he would do that.
Yeah, boy. The Clippers are a whole other story this year for agency because I believe Blake Griffin's a free agent. And I'm not saying I don't want him, but also you hear the whole thing about the Chris Paul rule for
Right.
free agency to where it seems like he's just going to become a minority owner with how much money he might get.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. He and LeBron negotiated that 36 and under rule to be the 38 and under rule now, for those that aren't familiar. And so that takes effect with the new CBA in July. And so, yeah, Blake is in the same situation as Paul. He has an option for next year, but he will decline it, I'm sure. Yeah. There are some folks who think that because his season was so injury riddled that he might opt into that year, but I think that's crazy. I think that even with the injuries he had this year, he could find 5 teams that are willing to give him a max contract just on his sheer talent.
Yeah, I think the Clippers try to keep Paul and Chris Paul and Blake Griffin. One guy like I imagined and hoped for would be JJ Redick, but now that I think about it, we're not going to have enough money to keep him.
And not without doing something like trading Kent or trading Dwight. I don't see it happening unless, like I said, unless for some reason I can't think of that JJ just wants to be with the Hawks. But I'm not aware of any relationship he has with anyone in the Hawks. And of course, we don't know who the new GM is going to be, so it's impossible to speculate if JJ might have a relationship with who that person is. But I think it would be an upgrade for sure, but it's very unlikely.
Yeah, and I don't know. We kind of have an odd. Our shooting guard position is very strange right now, so it's kind of odd to think like who's going to be on the team there. I'm with you. Tim Hardaway isn't a starter. I think he would best be served coming off the bench, but I don't know.
I'm one of the biggest Timmy supporters out there.
Yeah,
but if he's willing to accept somewhere to 8 to 10 million a year for 2 to 3 years, something like that, to make good starter backup money is fine. Otherwise, I wouldn't commit more than that to him.
Yeah, and this kind of just goes back to last year. Like, why in the world did we extend Kent Bazemore, especially after the draft and knowing that this was coming up, and it kind of just blows my mind even more because I thought about this a year ago, and now it's just kind of like, oh yeah, it's not any better. I'm starting to realize even more mistakes because of that. But
yeah, and if you look at it on paper, I'm saying shooting guard should be their focus because that's the position would be most valuable to upgrade the starting lineup. But if they bring Hardaway back on paper, Hardaway and Bibby should be sharing all the minutes at the 2. So
yeah,
what do they do with that depth if they bring in an upgrade at the starting shooting guard position? That it's problematic on a number of levels.
I don't know. Get Nick Young. Isn't he a free agent this year?
He has an option. He has an option. He's like Paul and Blake. He has an option.
I'm kidding. All right.
Swaggy.
Okay. Oh my goodness. I don't know what I would do. Just imagine him and Hardaway on the same team. Anyway, okay.
That would be a very Joe Dumars move because he likes to shoot and play no defense.
Okay. Sam Hodge, one of my favorite guys, who's a listener, asked, "What's your best case and worst case scenario for this offseason?" Best case, last week you kind of convinced me. I wasn't for bringing back Paul Millsap, and I didn't really care. But last season, you kind of convinced me. It's probably best that we bring him back, but hopefully not for a max. Actually, yes, that would be a best case. We bring him back, but not for a max. I don't know. worst case, real quick. I could tell you what my worst case is. We lose, we lose Paul Millsap because of name recognition. We throw a max contract or something like that at Blake Griffin, and then Blake Griffin continuously gets hurt and continuously only plays like 50 games and always gets hurt during the playoffs, which has kind of been a theme, at least for his playoffs the past couple of years.
Yeah, I think whoever ends up paying Blake is taking a big risk. They may feel like it's with a risk worth taking, just depending on where that franchise is talent wise, But it's going to be a very risky move. I think the worst case scenario is that Tony Wrestler hires a GM that doesn't value Bud. I think that's the worst case scenario. I think that 95%
Yep.
of 95% of how good or bad the summer goes for me comes down to who they hire to be their GM, because it has so much to do with whether Bud will be here 3-4 years from now. It has so much to do with, roster development and talent evaluation and all those sorts of things. So I'm kind of putting all of my evaluation chips all on that move for the most part, and almost I probably care less right now about like free agency and the draft now. I'm usually super interested in those things, but because who they decide to hire to be their GM has so much impact on their future, that's just getting so much of my emotional energy as a fan, if you will.
You know what? My mind was still in free agency, so I completely ignored. Wasn't even thinking about that. No, I spent an entire hour, the first half of this podcast, talking about how much I do not want Joe Dumars to be the GM. Okay, worst case scenario is we get Joe Dumars and he acts like he didn't learn a single thing that happened that got him let go as the GM in Detroit, and he continues that here in Atlanta. That'd be the worst case scenario.
I hope this Joe Dumars, not to go all the way back, but I just hope this Joe Dumars stuff is just the ownership group doing Grant Hill a solid, at least talking to the guy. But I hope there's nothing more to it than that.
Yeah. And let's see here. Final question we got from, where's the last question? James Braswell at Jimmy Braswell asks, what's been the biggest disappointment of the 2016-2017 season? Also, what are my thoughts on Guardians of the Galaxy 2? Okay, biggest disappointment, James. My biggest disappointment was that time period when we thought that the Hawks were actually going to rebuild and blow the team up. And that's when they got rid of Kyle Korver. But then the Hawks basically played a schedule against the weakest part of their season, weakest part in their schedule, and won like 10 games or something like that. And they decided they weren't going to trade Paul Millsap. And then to kind of just prove that we were right, that it was a weak schedule, they went and lost like 8 games straight. And that was the biggest disappointment to me, at least. And then I guess hearing about the interview with Wrestler, just some of the moves he's making right now. And my thoughts on Guardian of the Galaxy 2. James, it's amazing that you knew that I have already seen this. Lots of bright colors reminded me of a Skittles commercial. Would have been great if the writers from like Rick and Morty or something came in and punched up a lot of the stuff, so it would have been more intelligent. But it's like the last movie, just bigger and in some parts, I would say dumber. But lots of colors. All right, Glenn, go ahead. I'm done.
I have not seen the movie, so I can't comment. But I am definitely in favor of any of the Rick and Morty creators being involved in anything. I support that.
Oh, you're a Rick and Morty watcher?
Oh yeah.
I just wrapped it up. Somebody suggested it to me, and I just finished up and saw the first episode of season 3 a couple days ago. And
yeah, I'm not fully caught up, but
okay.
It's one I'll like if I'm going on a flight, I'll download like 4 episodes and watch it while I'm on a flight. That's kind of how I consume it.
It's an oddly brilliant show with how they handle stuff. Like
it is,
yeah.
It is surprisingly intelligent and has surprising depth.
Yes, a lot of depth, and it's very good. Anyway, what was your biggest disappointment from the season? To answer, Jim.
My biggest disappointment. Sorry to be boring and kind of echo part of your answer, but Tony Wrestler becoming so hands-on. And I
Yeah.
probably say that because I didn't expect the team to be very good. I thought they might be a little good at best. But no single player really played any differently than I expected, except probably Malcolm Delaney. When he lost his confidence. But I still have hope for him next year. But yeah, the biggest disappointment for me was how hands-on wrestler became.
All right. So, man, I completely skipped a subject to talk about today. Um, maybe we can go over it real quick in a couple minutes right
Sure.
now. But thank you, James. Thank you for your question. So, I meant to go over this earlier when we were talking about um, your player reviews, and this kind of, at least before your player reviews, because this kind of goes into the whole GM thing. So, one question is, at least amongst the David Griffin and Joe Dumars stuff that we were talking about, is what would we want in a GM and who do we want? You wrote an article on this. Everyone can find on peachtreehoops.com about what to look for a GM. And I was actually going to name a couple names that of lesser known people who haven't held a GM position yet, but I feel would be an interesting hire or someone for the Hawks to look at. So real quick, I'm just going to go down a list of names. Now, you mentioned earlier it's probably a bad thing about if teams bring in former players. So we're going to continue with this bad idea.
No. I don't think teams should not bring in former players. I think it's hard for a
Oh,
franchise to bring in one of their best players of the franchise history. I think there's risk in that move. But
okay.
I'm not against bringing in former players.
Oh, okay. 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 All right. Well, Sharif Abdul Rahim, um, known as being, he's an Atlanta native, so that's a plus. Played for the Hawks, that's another plus. Very intelligent guy, was the coach of the D League team, and did a lot of player personnel movement for the Kings before just suddenly, abruptly leaving the Kings. Now, later, this is to find out that the Kings went incredibly crazy after he left. So maybe that's part of the reason why he left. But that was one name I was looking at.
That's interesting.
Um,
I'm not familiar with what he's been doing the last couple of seasons, but the suggestion means that when we're done here, I'm going to go take a look. I like him as a person, and I know that the Kings have basically lost their minds. They hired Vlade Divac, who had no experience in any capacity whatsoever, and that's been just a colossal wreck there. But Sharif seems like he has the personality to be like a well-rounded person and do well in a role like that. So that's just my initial reaction.
all right. So number two, another guy that I have, Mike Zareen. He is one of the big analytical guys in the league right now. I want to say he's up in the front office in Boston. Obviously, he's not the GM. That's Danny Ainge, but one of the big analytical guys. He's the guy who thought up that wheel idea, the wheel idea for the draft that Zach Lowe brought up. I know you've probably heard of it,
Yes, I have.
and he has a lot of respect from Daryl Morey. And I don't know if the Hawks want to go pure analytics, that'd be a guy to take a look at.
Yeah, that's
You know,
interesting. Already I got a comment to my article asking, well, who are some candidates you think meet this criteria put out there? And I haven't responded to Raffaello yet. He put that out there, but I'm I'm considering maybe in a couple of days putting together an article on possible candidates, but it just depends on if I have time to do the proper amount of work to put something like that together. But
yeah.
for example, I can tell you which organizations, if they're going to pull a quote lieutenant from another organization, I would start with, I hope they draw from the Heat. I wouldn't mind if they draw from the Celtics. The Spurs are an obvious draw in the relationship
Well,
with
yeah.
the folks there. I think Dennis Lindsay in Utah has done very well, and maybe whoever his trusted lieutenant is. Those are the first ones that come to mind. I think that if you tried to lure someone away from Golden State, that your it would just be a flashy thing because their success is really as amazing as it has been. They haven't shown yet if they can sustain that or not. So, and with the Heat, they've reinvented themselves and had success. In San Antonio,
Yeah.
they've had sustained success. In Boston, they've had a game plan, and I think I think sometimes they're moving too slowly, but they have a plan. They definitely have a plan, and everyone is on board that plan. And in Utah, I think Dennis Lindsey has done an amazing job here in the post Carmelo and John Stockton era of kind of stripping it down and building up a really good team. So if you ask me which organizations do I hope they pull from, if that's how it goes, those are the organizations that come to mind for me.
Dennis Lindsey's, well, that was one of the guys I was going to mention, but so
Right.
thank you. So thank
Yeah.
you. You took it off my list.
Yeah.
Jeff Weltman, he's now the GM he's now the GM for the Raptors, but not really. I don't know. I'd be cool with taking him because, some guys apparently are trying to chase after him, but he's a guy who's possibly on the market for the Raptors. Um, Michael Winger with the Thunder, formerly worked with Ferry, but he's more of a cap guy, caps and contracts guy. This is somebody I could see the Hawks getting if they're more worried about the business side of being a GM than the actual,
Sure.
player personnel. He's assistant with the Thunder. And also finally, Troy Weaver with the Thunder. He's more of the player personnel kind of guy. He's worked in front office for over a decade, been in been with the Thunder, take that how you will.
No,
But he was
yeah,
go ahead.
no, Troy Weaver is an excellent candidate.
Yeah.
I think that's the strongest candidate you have on your lists. The last 2 years, I've heard his name come up with any GM vacancy in terms of someone the team should consider. So he has a very strong brand, I know, across the league, and has been a big part of their draft track record, which has been one of the better track records of any team in the last
Yeah.
10 years.
Troy Weaver was the one I was leading last because I thought when I was doing the research, he seemed to be the best one. Over a decade's worth of work in the front office, one of the better player personnel guys out there. He was the guy who helped, even when he wasn't with the Thunder, he was one of the guys that helped recruit Melo to go to Syracuse, little fun fact. And also the guy who kind of like turned it around to like convince everyone, hey, we need to draft this guy, Russell Westbrook, instead of somebody else. So he has a good track history, has, a good working history, still relatively young, just looking for his first shot out there. I know he's interviewed with a few places before in the past, just he's looking for his first big chance. And that was the last one I had up there. If the Hawks want to go for a splashy move, that's kind of the one that I would think they should go for. He's the one that you don't know him, but he's the one that I imagine like writers and analysts would be like, oh, look at that.
Yes. I would be thrilled if they hired Troy Weaver. I would be thrilled with that outcome.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's kind of the one I had last and the one I was rooting for. But that was about a list of 5 guys. Um, so yeah, everyone who heard it here, I take Troy Weaver over Joe Dumars. And yeah, that's my answer, guys. But anyway, Glenn, thank you for sticking with me this long. Thank you for answering our questions. And let me double check. Do we have anything last second? Nope. James was the last one that sent me a question.
Excellent.
Cool.
Thanks for having me, Josh. I had a lot of fun talking with you as always.
Thank you, Glenn. And I don't know. I'm sure something crazy will happen this week, and I might have to try to hunt you down and get more good information out of you.
I'm not hard to find, so feel free.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening, and we are out of here.